What I can tell you is that I've heard some stories that since President Raisi was killed or died, when the head of state of a country like Iran dies in a plane crash,
with the foreign minister on the same plane.
Yeah, I'm thinking that was an assassination. I'm going out on a limb. I'm
it's feasible, yeah.
It's just very, very possible. So I'm being facetious when I say I'm going out on a limb. Of course he was assassinated. Christ. Prove to me he wasn't. You know what I mean? Like, of course he was.
The proof is on you.
But who assassinated him is probably the more interesting question. Not whether he was assassinated, who did it and why. And I've been hearing some very interesting reports out of Iran recently from people that I interact with and I trust, and we converse on these things, and some information that comes out, and you try to assess whether it's true or not, and that is that.
You're watching Capital Cosm. My name is Danny, and today's guest is Tom Luongo. Tom, thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, let's just dive right in, Tom. What is occupying your headspace right now? What is the top story, in your opinion, right now?
I would be remiss not to say World of Warcraft Classic Anniversary Edition, but no, I kid only partially. But because we have been playing a lot as we try to cope with all the other shit that's going on that makes us want to go, why do anything that's long lasting, because they're just going to nuke us tomorrow. And there's, I'm being,
who's they? Who's going to nuke us?
Someone, and they shall remain nameless, but their initials are the British, are desperately trying to get us involved, and Davos, to a lesser extent, in continental Europe, desperately want us involved in an exchange with Russia of some form, some kinetic exchange with Russia in some form or another, and they are willing to risk the Russians lobbing nukes at us in terminal frustration. Thankfully, Vladimir Putin is not insane, and we're all still sitting here talking about how we could be dealing with this, because if not for Putin, if we had the equivalent of the John Boltons of America, the Russian style running the Kremlin right now, this conversation wouldn't be happening.
So I often hear this talking point that if we get rid of Putin, then we'll get our own version of like a Russian, like you said, a Russian Bolton, a Russian neocon in his place. Is that true from what you've researched?
Without a doubt. There's the people that are standing. Putin is the moderate in the room, without a doubt. I mean, I don't take Dmitry Medvedev very seriously. I consider him kind of the Russian equivalent of John Bolton. He's a guy that, they let him out of the cage when he's had a few drinks to spew on Twitter and to bloviate, and then they put him back in the box when they need to. Like, that's his job. I may be wrong about that, but I'm going to continue to go with that as my operating principle when it comes to Medvedev. But the reality is that, like we have here in the U.S., Trump is going to be dealing with the gaggle of crazy Trotskyite neocons who are going to be trying to do everything imaginable to get him involved in a war that he does not want to fight. And that's what we're seeing in Syria. And that's part of what we're seeing in Syria. And it's part of what we're seeing in Ukraine and everything else. The overriding architecture of the problem that's in front of us is that you have a whole bunch of people who have wealth and power who do not want to give that up to an America that doesn't want to be effectively ruled from afar, and from a Russian, Chinese, Iranian alliance that doesn't want to be ruled by them either. And, I've been saying this for a long time, and I'll continue to say it, that this is the culmination of around a 500-year arc of history that ends European colonialism in all of its forms for a very long time. And that's centered around certain families in Europe and certain, old relationship networks in Europe. And they're going to play every card they have until they don't have any. and we have to continue to like watch them play those cards and hope that no one overreacts to them. And that's the way I see them in very broad strokes.
Right. Who are these families in Europe? Like for people who may not know, like
I don't put I don't go there. Like we know the Rothschilds, and that doesn't matter. What matters is we know they're there. Like I don't need to name the names either because I frankly don't even care enough to know the names
not the names,
of
not the name, but just from a broad
we're talking we're
perspective.
just talking the old colonial, the old infrastructure that that sits behind what used to sit behind the crown in Britain and the crown in France and whatnot. These and in the Netherlands and Germany and everywhere else, it's the banking industry. It's the oligarchs that stood behind them and made vast wealth off of the colonization of Africa, North America, India, and the rest of the rest of the world, and to a lesser extent, South America and others. These old colonial powers have remnants that exist, and they exist now mostly within the European banking system. That's what they control, and that's what the European Union is an attempt to ultimately to create a political union to consolidate all the disparate banking powers under one political rubric, as opposed to having one in Germany, one in the Netherlands, one in the UK, one in Spain, one in Italy, yada, yada, yada. Now, let's put them all under one rubric with one political system, one currency, and one central bank. And then utilize that block's power in the collective to force results on the rest of the world, force conditions in terms of business on the rest of the world, which is exactly what the European Union does every time these people get up in the morning. They think of a new regulation that they can export to the rest of the world.
So you mentioned Syria. Definitely lots to unpack in Syria. I had Alex Craner on the other day, and he's of the opinion that this may be a trap set up on the part of Russia to entrap the United States and the West in kind of like an Afghanistan, Soviet Union type of scenario. I want to get your take on Syria. Number one, do you see it in a similar way as Alex does? And if so, or if not, why is that?
Sure. Okay, so I did watch your interview with Alex, and I thought it was very good, and it was a very interesting take that Alex had, and it was one I hadn't considered yet. I've been been considering that now for the last 48 hours. What I'll say is this, and I spoke about this morning to my patrons on our market report. I said, my only criticism of Alex's presentation the other day was that it was a little too, cause and effect, a little too linear. I think Alex is the bare bones of a very, very powerful argument. I would rather, as opposed to looking at it as, well, this is, I kind of, will just set a trap for them. I don't believe they set a trap for anything, for anybody. I do believe that they had a flow chart of how events would work out. And they said, well, if events, if this happens, then we move to this. And then if this happens, we move to that. And they have all, probability clouds of how they're going to deal with it. But they're going to deal with Israel, Turkey, the United States, Britain, everybody who's playing and pressuring Syria. If these various things work out, and there's always a decision moment, and if it works out in a particular way, okay, so fine, then we cut off that portion of the decision tree and we move over to this area of it. And then eventually the decision tree gets whittled down to, oh, it's time to pull out. And Alex's analysis of how Russians fight war, I think, is very powerful. I agree with him completely, on that. So the Russians are always willing to conserve materiel and men for as long as possible and give up territory. And in the process of them giving up territory, usually leave as much of a minefield behind as possible. And then this is how they beat Napoleon. This is how they beat Hitler. And then eventually they put, in the case of Napoleon, they just waited him out for the winter. In the case of Hitler, they just threw millions of men at the problem until Hitler was overextended. And the amount of men they threw at the problem was enough to wipe out the rest of the German Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. And then they could come back and sweep like a wave across Eastern Europe and all the way to Berlin. Because of the weapon systems that we're dealing with today, Russia can't wait until they're on the doorstep of Moscow. We're not fighting with, muskets and, or early black powder rifles and on horseback with Napoleon, or with 88 millimeter shells coming out of a German Panzer. We're now dealing with intermediate range missiles that can shoot, and they can put 350 pounds on target, precision guidance, up to 250, 300 miles away. Right. So now it's a different war. So they have to move their line in the sand. They're where they're willing to retreat to, no further than Ukraine. But Syria is not part of that mix. Syria is as far as the Russian military is capable of force projecting. Any farther than that, you're out of your minds. Anybody who tries to sell you on that idea is lying to you. And they're doing so specifically to amplify the potential threat of Russia in order to sell you on the idea that Putin is the new Hitler. It's bullshit. It's complete nonsense. The whole Russian defensive security architecture is designed to protect Mother Russia within 600-mile radius of their borders, a 600-mile range beyond their borders. That's it. 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles. That's it. Everything else beyond that is irrelevant, which, by the way, is the western border of Ukraine. And Syria is right on that edge of that as well. So I don't disagree with Alex that the Russians like to play the cauldron game. They like to allow their opponent in, allow a weak point in the line, allow their opponent in, let them take some territory, and then close the gap behind them, trap them, capture their guys, take them off the board, move on to the next spot. And I'm saying that the Russians are the only ones to do this, but this is what they do a lot, and they're very good at it. So I don't disagree with Alex's argument that the way Syria fell feels like a number of things. But what I would caution everybody is like, that makes sense. So that must be it. No, it takes an entire series of events and conditions to get to the moment where you can credibly go, all right, well, we don't have a move to play here anymore. It's time to remove Assad from the scene, let Israel and Turkey take Damascus, and then let them deal with the consequences of it, which is going to be that it's going to be a mess that they're not going to want to deal with. And then hope that, maybe not hope, but they will then influence what's left behind to be as painful to manage for them as Syria was for the Russians. Like the whole point of us staying at Al-Tan, of holding on to all the land east of the Euphrates River, for Erdogan, supporting his head chopping Salafists in Idlib, yada, 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 was why? Was to keep the Russians bound down in Syria. What we were hoping the Russians would do is defend the land. Why? Because that's what we would do. We don't retreat. We don't give up an inch without a fight. Americans won't do that. The British won't do that. Europeans don't do that. They don't ever cede territory in order to win a war, in order to win a battle later. They fight all the way to the end, and they especially do so. And the reason that they do so is because they've always had industrial capacity advantage over their enemy, right? Go back 300-400 years. Europe is the bedrock and the foundation on which, and the industrial capacity of the world is built, right? So when you're an industrial powerhouse over your enemy, of course you don't give an inch. You don't have to. You can bring more weapons to bear than they can. You can bring more men to bear than they can. You have better logistics than they do. You have better food production, better ammo production. You can just keep pushing them, and you attrit them out. The West's idea of attriting out an enemy is to continually dump material into the situation and say, we can outlast you because we can outproduce you, right? The Russians, on the other hand, are saying, well, we can outproduce you, so we're going to leave, and then we're going to leave you to deal with this mess that we know you can't afford, because you already can't afford Ukraine. So now you got to afford Syria. Now, Syria is going to be cheaper to deal with than Ukraine is because you're not fighting us in Ukraine. Look at the way the Russians are fighting Ukraine. I identified this 2 years ago. I literally ended an article about the current state of affairs in Ukraine, I don't know, about 6 months into the war. And I said, look, what Putin is doing now is keeping this conflict just hot enough and grinding out small little victories here and small little victories there and wiping out another Ukrainian defense belt and wiping out another stronghold here and another small town there. That's, the whole map of Ukraine is nothing. The Eastern Ukraine is nothing but defensive formations. Take out a battalion here, take out a company there, take out the blah, 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 blah. Why? Because if they don't take a lot of territory, they understand the psychology of their enemy. Oh, the Russians are incapable of taking territory without a huge loss or without a huge fight. Therefore, all we have to do is keep the pressure on. All we have to do is keep throwing money at the problem because that's what we've always done. And guess what? We will eventually win. Well, what I said then and say now is the following. Opponent that has that kind of advantage over you, how do you beat them? You beat them by running a war of attrition in which you always allow them to always think they have the possibility of winning when they absolutely don't. So you don't show your full strength. You don't show your full hand. You don't show your full capabilities. You let them think you are weaker than you are so that they keep dumping guys and material and everything else into the freaking meat grinder. Punch all you want, we'll kill more. That's exactly what they've been doing. I mean, I look at the front lines in Ukraine and I say to myself, the Russians could take hundreds of square miles tomorrow. If they put the men on the board, if they put the men on the front lines, gave the order, boom, and saturation bombed, they could bust open a massive hole anywhere and 6, 7 different areas on the Ukrainian front line. You look at the war and you say to yourself, why are there so few people actually fighting? Because it's not a war. It's a special military operation. They've never upgraded it for specific legal reasons. Because under a war scenario, if he declares war, that means that Putin has different powers that he can draw upon. He's leaving it there on purpose. And he knows the psychology of his opponents well enough to know that they attribute all caution and all humanitarian impulses as weakness. And because they see that as weakness, Putin's using that wrinkle of neoconservative and especially British psychology against them. And it's driving them mad because they honestly think that all we have to do is one more time punch Putin in the mouth and embarrass him, and eventually he'll get angry and he'll do something that we can justify a wider war with. And he keeps going, that's cute. By the way, you missed. You didn't get anything. It's like a good martial arts match where the green belt attacks the brown belt and thinks he's actually landing blows, when really all he's hitting is your shoulder here, not the rib. Right? It's subtle. It's not a lot. Or you graze my face, but I'm like, no, I moved back just far enough that you think you made contact, but you did no damage. Right? That kind of thing. That's what he's doing here. And I don't attribute anything more to Putin and to the Russians than that. Like, I don't think they're masters of the universe. I don't think they're happy about what's happened in Syria at all, because they know for a fact that Erdogan betrayed them. But then again, the Russians are always very, very much in terms of foreign policy. They're always like, well, here are your options. We would prefer you to do this. If you choose not to do this, that's fine. And you do that, well, now we know what to do. And now we have good information and we know, oh, you betrayed us? Fuck you. Now you're going to die. And that's what Erdogan just did. I think Erdogan's days are very much numbered for a variety of reasons based on this. And some of which is that he's been lured into this moment in the same way that Netanyahu is being lured in to trying to expand to create greater Israel. I think they're going to get everything they want, these two, and then they're not going to be very happy with the results. And then it's going to be very unstable. And then a couple of years from now, we're going to be talking about how the whole thing collapses.
Alexander Dugin had a similar take to you just now. He alluded to the fact that it very well could be entrapment on the part of Turkey. He said this was a trap to trap Erdogan. So it's very interesting. I want to get your take on the relationship between Russia and Iran. Iran seems to be putting the blame on Assad quite a bit lately. It's been a few days removed since the fall, and they've been pinning the blame on Assad. Russia, not so much. So, does this hurt? Does this hurt the relationship between Russia and Iran moving forward?
I don't know. I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that I've heard some stories that since President Raisi was killed or died, when the head of state of a country like Iran dies in a plane crash,
with the foreign minister on the same plane.
Yeah, I'm thinking that was an assassination. I'm going out on a limb. I'm
it's feasible. Yeah,
it's just very, very possible. So I'm being facetious when I say I'm going out on a limb. Of course he was assassinated. Christ. Prove to me he wasn't. You know what I mean? Like, of course he was.
The proof is on you.
But who assassinated him is probably the more interesting question. Not whether he was assassinated, who did it and why. And I've been hearing some very interesting reports out of Iran recently from people that I interact with and I trust, and we converse on these things, and some information that comes out, and you try to assess whether it's true or not, and that is that you have a guy, I don't know the Iranian president's current name, and I should, and I don't, and I apologize. Let's say that again.
Pezeshkian.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. Thank you. I'm dead serious. I don't. After Raisi was killed, I'm like, I don't really care who comes into power, and that's a mistake on my part, because I think Pezeshkian, if that's his name, when I understand, he is not cut from the same cloth as the previous Iranian presidents. He's not a Khomeiniist, and if so, then Iran is looking at a potential shift in internal power at some point. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I know that things aren't cozy up at the top. And Raisi being killed, what if that was an inside job by the Iranians who were tired of the quote unquote the mullahs? I hate that phrase, but let's just use it as the common phrase that Americans understand the leaders of Iran to be, right? I think it's a terrible term, but whatever. But again, in so many ways, you have political leaders representing religious factions that aren't really religious leaders. They're political leaders that have grafted cynically the mantle of speaking for the religion. Netanyahu in Israel, Erdogan in Turkey, Khomeini in Iran. I'm positing that one. The other two are clearly obvious that they are purely political animals with zero spiritual element to their thing. But they love, oh my God, do they love the eschatology to use it for their own cynical political ends. Okay. And if that's the case, well, then Damascus had to fall to the Israelis before Erdogan loses control of Constantinople, before the Great War can occur, so that the Messiah can come to save the Jews. Because that's the order of operations in Muslim eschatology, which is also something that Dugin has spoke to and is clearly unknown information within the Kremlin. And now, I am not in any way, manner, shape, or form an expert on these things. I defer to friends of mine who have studied this at length to get some insight into this. I put that out there for people to consider as part of the framework of how this is going to play out.
Yeah, there's definitely meat
So,
on the bones there. I mean, from what I understand, the Reformist Party that Pezeshkian corresponds with, they are effectively the financial elites. They effectively control Iran's economy, and they also have a lot of money tied up in sanctions.
right.
So they stand to benefit from the sanctions being lifted. So they have more of an incentive to
To do what needs
normalize
to be
with
done
Europe. And
to
yeah,
normalize with the West, right? But you can't normalize relations with the West if Iran is still capable of funneling arms and weapons and quote unquote terrorists into into Hezbollah in Lebanon and or Gaza and in Syria. You can't do that. Now, does Netanyahu overplay that card? Because everybody who looks at him sideways is an Iranian asset. It's bullshit. And we all know it's bullshit. But, it works for the guy. It works for the guy on Capitol Hill. And then, of course, we have report after report after report now flooding the zone with Iranian drones flying over New Jersey. And all of this is like Iran, 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 Iran. Like, well, why? Because Iran is because now they're going to spin the tale that Iran is angry that we took down Assad, that we took down, that we're bombing their proxies in Hezbollah, that we're going to take out the Houthis and all this. And so, of course, Iran is going to go off half cocked and explode and try and kill Trump and everything else. That's all bullshit. I mean, I'm sure there are Iranians who would like to do that. I don't think that's what is going. Again, I think that's more just basic. That's basic British propaganda, like 101. Like the British are really good at this kind of thing. They set up a scenario and then they give you the justification for it and they amplify it through the media they control. The British are very good at this. They really are. They're experts at it. It's their super fucking power. I'm dead serious. And I won't back down on that point, because if you do, if you don't get that, then you don't understand the last 300 years of fucking history and like print newspaper, then the history of print newspaper as a propaganda wing of colonial governments. I mean, come on, guys. Like,
yeah.
You think the New York Times ever didn't work for somebody else's foreign policy establishment? Are you kidding me? Is that air you think you're breathing? Like, fuck you. It's retarded. Like, let's stop acting like children. Let's act like grown-ups, and let's understand that this is the way the world actually operates. Now, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. Did you hear the latest? I mean, speaking of propaganda, did you hear the latest news about these drones that are coming out of New Jersey and New York and so forth?
Yeah, I saw this. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I forget who it was, but there's a Republican congressman, that came on Fox News earlier today and said that they were operating out of a mothership, an Iranian Chinese mothership on the East Coast.
It's ridiculous. Like, and they use the phrase mothership because they're also trying to tie that to the whole, oh, by God, there are aliens right among us now, too. Oh, by the way, that's all bullshit as a distraction against the directed energy weapons that we actually have. Like, it's all fucking fake. Every bit of it. Every freaking bit of it. Like, you really think Mitch McConnell fell down the stairs? No, he was pushed down the goddamn stairs. Like, flush out your headgear, new guy. We don't waste gooks for freedom. Immortal words of Animal Mother from Full Metal Jacket. Stop. You cannot take any of this shit at face value. It's all bullshit. The British are desperate to cover the collapse of their bond market and their government. As Keir Starmer, step by step, betrays Brexit and moves the UK back into the European Union. And to stop, they need a freaking war. They have made massive promises to bondholders and to investors in Ukraine that they can't pay. It's envelope day in Kiev. And that's why you're seeing the British government, the American government, this government, that government, they're all shoveling money into Ukraine because they've got coupon payments due on debt that they've issued. And they need to keep the investors on the hook and try and continue to press them to keep them on the hook that, no, we really are. No, it's next year. We're going to get Russia next year. Well, no, 2026. We're going to get Russia in 2026. We're going to get them. I'm telling you, we're winning. Just stay with us. And they keep ponying up money to keep everybody happy. When the reality is that there's more money on the table right now for everybody to shut down Ukraine, shut down Syria, and rebuild everything. But guess who doesn't get to be a part? Doesn't get a major part in a lot of that? Guess who collapses while that happens? Guess who gets to do the majority of that? The Americans. Guess who doesn't get to do the majority of that? Europe and the UK. Why? Because Trump absolutely knows who our real enemy is. He's made it abundantly clear. Just like Putin has made it abundantly clear. Europe is our real enemy. China, he's got them ring fenced. Absolutely. All he has to do is sit down with them and force them into a trade negotiation. They'll cut a deal with the United States tomorrow. It won't actually be hard. It's the Europeans and the British that don't have the collateral necessary to run a modern economy without access to the Middle East or without access to Russia. They need the access to the energy because they spent the last 40 years trying to convince us that there was no oil and that we had to, push a dead whale up a beach with solar and wind, as opposed to taking all that capital and putting it into PEM fuel cells, run on natural gas, and/or thorium molten salt, or anything having to do with the uranium-233 reactor cycle, as opposed to the uranium-238 reactor cycle. We wouldn't need any of this shit. All the wars would end. All the nonsense would end if we had taken those trillions of dollars that we spent in developing carbon credits and carbon capture and EVs and this and that, and all this crap, every bit of it, all for the climate grift. And the climate grift was always about making everybody who's more efficient than Europe less efficient and bringing them down to their level because they didn't have the capacity to up their game. Why couldn't they up their game? Because they were net energy importers. They pissed and all the people that they want to buy energy from, they pissed off. They made the gambit to steal Russia's energy when they had the best deal on energy of any importer in the history of man. The Russians were selling them pipe gas below market cost for years. It's how Germany built modern Germany. That and American tariffs on German tariffs on American imports of so they built the German chemical industry and the auto industry and all that stuff. It was all built on the back of cheap Russian gas, and they screwed the pooch. And now they want us to fix it. How about no? And that's why Trump was like, no, you're going to buy our LNG if you're not going to fund NATO.
Hey guys, quick pause. I won't take too much of your time, but if you're looking to add into your gold and silver stack, please consider Miles Franklin. More specifically, email them, info@milesfranklin.com, and tell them that Capital Cosmos sent you in the subject line to unlock special pricing that you won't find on the website. In the unlikely event that you don't like the prices, you could always not buy. There's no commitment necessary, but I do recommend Miles Franklin for a number of reasons. The customer support is top-notch, the prices are great, and I know the people there. Great people all around. So with all that said, let's get back to the video. Thanks, guys. And is that why he went to Macron first? Is that why his first trip overseas post-election victory? I believe it was that meeting with Macron and Zelensky. And is it because Macron is most likely the head war hawk there behind the Ukraine war and behind Europe?
Yes. In that respect, probably yes. I mean, Keir Starmer really is, obviously, but on the continent, it would be
because UK and Europe.
It would be Ursula von der Leyen and her cackling bunch of crony. Not allowed to use the word implied. Just continue the alliteration. You'll get my drift. The Kaya Calluses and those. I can continue this alliteration as a matter of fact. But Macron is the mouthpiece for Davos, the WEF, the Rothschilds, yada yada yada. Oh, by the way, no. But if you allow Syria to collapse, and you take the Russians for the most part out of Syria, and Iran has no real ability now to threaten Israel, then Israel needs to calm the fuck down because they had no reason to continue expanding. If they continue to expand, they're not going to get any support from anyone because Netanyahu is going to finally is going to finally realize that the people who are in charge of the United States now have no loyalty to Israel, like the boomers did in the past. None, zero. They have no emotional messenger in Israel. The Gen X doesn't care. And if you think Gen X doesn't care, the millennials care less, and Gen Z cares even less than they do. So everybody 50 years and younger in the United States has no emotional investiture in Israel. They don't. So if Netanyahu thinks that he can come over here and say to the United States, jump, and we say how high, he's going to get a whole lot of Gen X yeah, fuck that. Get in the back of the glowing car. We're done. I'm making a Repo Man reference. That's nice, Mr. President. No.
So how does this all
say my name? You're the Duke of New York. How many Gen X memes do I have to throw at you?
One more.
Yeah, BB, the check is in the mail. You know what I mean? Yeah, I paid my dues, BB. The check is in the mail. Okay.
Nice.
Another Jack, because John Carpenter, he rules.
So what are you expecting from a second Trump term?
I'm expecting that the Democrats and Davos and the British will do as much as possible to create as much chaos as possible. With the way Syria has collapsed, I'm a little less worried that there's going to be a kind of Christmas coup against Trump in order to stop him from taking power, installing Kamala. I went over this on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. I was really feeling, I still feel like there's something coming domestically. But another part of me is no, I think they've made their peace with the fact that Trump is coming into power and that maybe they can just steer him in the right direction on foreign policy and maybe they'll still get what they want. I don't know. Trump is going to come in like a wrecking ball. He's already made it abundantly clear. And I think we're also beaten down with Stockholm syndrome from these terrible fucking people who have been running our world for so long that we don't believe it yet. So we're all in Missouri mode. You got to show me. So give me the $2 trillion in spending cuts. Give me the laying off, hundreds of thousands of U.S. government workers. I mean, UBI recipients, because that's what they are. We have UBI in the United States. We just call them government workers. No offense to the government workers in the audience. I used to be one.
And what do you see moving forward when it comes to the economy and the markets for 2025 as we close out 2024?
God, Danny, I'm going to stick with what I've been saying about interest rates, spending cuts, and everything else, and the Fed and the balance sheet. Unless Powell surprises everybody on next Wednesday, he's going to cut by 25 basis points on Wednesday, even though inflation came in this morning a little hotter than it should have been. Blah, blah. That's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. Powell has to get a normalized yield curve that's upwardly sloping. He's got to get a lower short end than he has a long end. And because of his very successful draining of the world of dollar liquidity overseas, there is a very strong bid underneath the long end of the U.S. Long end of the U.S. yield curve. So you can't. And I mean, aside from the fact that you have all the other central banks that are desperately buying 10s and 30s in order to try and keep the long end down because they fear their rates rising in places like Germany and France and the UK and others that are dealing with real, honest to God political turmoil, where the bond market should be selling off, but they're not being allowed to by various actors, including Janet Yellen at the Treasury, Christine Lagarde at the Fed, as I've said many, many times in the past. So I don't see the long end of the yield curve moving. So that means Powell has to cut. So that's going to be inflationary credit inflationary. It's going to create a normally upsloping yield curve that will allow, if we deregulate the economy and we via Doge and we cut a significant amount from the American budget. How about the 50, however much money we're sending FEMA every year? They don't do anything with it other than terrorize people. How about we get rid of that? How about we get rid of most of the IRS's budget? How about we get rid of USAID, which Mike Benz told us the other day? It's a $92 billion slush fund for color revolutions. Like, there are plenty of things that we can do. And then I can't even get into the balance sheet stuff, which I'd be happy to get into a little later, but let's just start there. So we get rid of spending and we deregulate the economy thanks to Chevron and jarczy. We do exactly what Vivek has told us we should do, which is that the Supreme Court has invalidated 18,000 cases that were judged under Chevron. Those have all been overturned. None of those rules apply, and we're not going to enforce any of them now. Congress better get busy legislating and bringing that shit to President Trump's desk if they want to keep those things in place. You do all that, that's deflationary. And then the Fed continues to cut interest rate, cut the balance sheet. So he's going to cut the balance sheet, continue to roll off the balance sheet with QT while cutting interest rates, stepping on the gas and the brake at the same time, as they would put it in monetary policy circles, which is a no-no, by the way. It's actually not a no-no. It's just silly, bloviating by a bunch of globalists. So you have two big deflationary impulses. You have cut in spending and QT. On the other side of it, you have cutting interest rates and potentially overhauling the tax code, right? Or how about reclassification of a whole bunch of assets that we currently tax at the wrong rates? Like Bitcoin, like gold, like many other things. Imagine what would happen if we stopped capital gains tax on gold, on Bitcoin, on silver, on all these things that are taxed because the IRS said we need to tax them this way, not because Congress legislated it this way. Okay. What if? Well, what does that look like then? It looks like it's a mess for 2025, but it also says to investors that the United States is rapidly cleaning up its balance sheet in a massive kind of reorganization. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, let's talk about a company that's in trouble. They had a bad product launch. The company is collapsed. The company's in bad shape. They put out a bunch of a bad product that nobody bought. They've got all this investment in that product. They don't have the money, so they didn't get the revenue off of it. They've got a bunch of debt on their balance sheet. They're kind of fucked, and their cap table looks terrible. What do? You force a cram down on the original investors. You let the stock price drop 85 to 90%. You cram down the original bondholders and pay them 10 cents on the dollar. And then you use that and get out from underneath that, and then do another round of capital raise, dilute the company, i.e., that's how you bring the stock price down. And then you have and then you publish a turnaround plan and you hope that investors buy it. Well, how do you do that? Well, by getting rid of the bond holders, by cramming down the bond holders, you've now gotten rid of 90% of your previous unfunded liabilities, right? You spin off the non-productive portions of the company into a different subsidiary, let them sink or swim on their own. Isolate the good capital, get rid of the shit, and then rebuild, and then try and offer a new round of funding to invest in the new company, right? That's what we do. That's what effectively bankruptcy is. Well, we have to kind of admit that that's where we are, but we're going to do that and this is the big one. What people don't realize when I say we're not just cutting a couple of $1 trillion worth of spending, or even $1 trillion worth of spending, or even $500 billion worth of spending. How much is that going to propagate through the unfunded liabilities pile? Because if you deregulate a lot of healthcare, prices in healthcare will come down drastically, because most of healthcare is about billing requirements, and it's all just 90% of the healthcare costs and education costs went into office managers and administrators. Didn't go to like more doctors or more nurses or better, or more drugs or this. None of that stuff. No infrastructure. Just
bureaucratic purposes. Yep.
Just paper pushers, just the James Burnhams, the managerial state. That's it. Now, those people, how many of those are at their 20 for government service? How many? I don't know. Let's just say there's 30% of them. And they're 50 years old. They're my age. They're waiting on retirement, but they're going to stay and can continue to accrete to their pension and work and accrete to their pension at a higher rate than they did for the first 20 years for the next 10, so that their future pension is based on a higher salary. It's based on a higher years of service. That's a massive bloat to what we're going to pay these people. So an investor like me, as the outsider coming in and going, well, if you're not going to get rid of these people, then no matter how much you change the business model today, you can't grow past this. You got to get rid of that guy. Vivek has already put this out there. Why don't we just fire all these people, give them 2-year severance? Or why don't we force them back into the office and see how many of them quit? And the ones who won't quit, why don't we offer them 2-year severance? Because it's better to pay them 2 years now than pay the extra 25 or 30 years on their pension at 1.5 what they're currently making. There's a big chunk of the unfunded liabilities off the top. Now let's get Medicare costs down by just deregulating the friggin' by getting rid of all the administrators and the billing overhead and all the bureaucracy in the medical system, all the safety regulations and all the HR regulations, all the DEI and all that stuff. These people are all worthless to the economy. They are all, they're not worthless people. Maybe personally, they may be lovely people. I don't give a shit. But from a GDP perspective or from a national balance sheet perspective, these people are nothing but a drain. They're capital destructive. They're on UBI, and they know it. And that's the part that everybody here does not want to admit. I'll admit it, because of the 5 years I worked at the University of Florida, by the time I was there for 5 years, I started to feel like that. And I worked my ass off when I worked there. I worked for a very ambitious Chinese doctor who, wanted to, win a fucking Nobel Prize in science or some shit. This woman was crazy. I loved her. I loved working for her. But she was nuts. And I worked like a fucking dog. I came from the private sector. I went to the public sector, so they didn't have to work so friggin' hard. I wound up working twice as hard for her for the first 3 years. By the end of year 3, I'm like, I ain't doing this shit anymore. And then, 2 hours a day, 90-minute lunches, an hour and a half sitting there chatting with my friend, another, lab manager, sipping a cup of coffee. I got paid to do nothing many days. I know what it looked like. I know what my work ethic looked, how badly my work ethic suffered by the time I was done after 5 years. You tell me, and I was the good one. The guys who had been there 15, 18, 20 years, forget it. They didn't work at all. They didn't have to. Half the professors didn't have any research grants, but they had a position for them to run a laboratory. So their whole research department was, kind of on life support, just kind of going through the motions, collecting their paychecks, paying off their mortgage, paying off their car payment, putting their kids through college. We all do it. But the taxpayer doesn't want to pay for it anymore. And we have to be honest with ourselves that we know that that's wrong.
It's not.
And I'm willing to be the douchebag that stands up here and goes, yeah, you're wrong. Now stop it. Take the fucking payout and go back into the private sector, because all that money that we're not going to spend on UBI, we're going to put back into the private economy, and there are going to be jobs for you. But we got 2 years worth of reorganization until we're ready for you to re-enter the workforce. So please do me a big favor and take another 2 years worth of UBI, but you don't get 25. You don't think we can't recapitalize the United States with that? Really?
How much would that hit GDP? GDP being a less than ideal measure enough as it is, because of the fact that government spending such a huge component of GDP. What would be the impact there, and what would be the larger ramifications for the economy?
Well, here's the problem, right? GDP is gross national spending.
Exactly.
Not gross national product. It's gross national spending. Yep. Who cares if we don't spend as much? Really, as long as we spend the money differently or better, it all depends. I made when I first started going down this rabbit hole, I said to everybody, how about we do this? Vivek opened up an entirely, I just went through like Vivek's whole thing, and he opened up an entirely different way of looking at this than I did originally. When I first started doing this and saying this 3 years ago, and people were giving me pushback, well, they'll never cut spending, or you can't cut spending, there's no room in the budget, blah, blah, blah. Do we spend $1 trillion overseas? Foreign aid, defense spending, this spending, the Department of Energy spending, this grants, science grants, this, that, everything else. Do we spend $1 trillion overseas? Do we? I think we do. What's the SG&A on that $1 trillion? $70 billion? That's money flowing overseas. It's not part of the domestic economy. Who gives a fuck about it? That's good for the economy of Thailand or Israel, but not America. America's domestic gross national spending changes by $70 billion. We fart that on a biweekly basis. What I mean by SG&A is the line item for administration of that money, how we send that money overseas. Right? It's like SG&A as a line item in a balance sheet of a company. How much money did it cost you to run the company to, make the revenue? Right? Cost you, it's a cost center, and people, and SG&A costs between 5% and 7%, maybe as high as 9% in an inefficient company or even a startup. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's call it 7%. Its government is really inefficient. Call it 9%. It's still only $90 billion. And I know my libertarian brethren will get horrible, get the vapors and everything when I talk about, well, it's just $90 billion. In the grand scheme of things, a $27 trillion economy, it's a rounding error. Put the people in friggin' unemployment in the dole for 2 years, and don't worry about it. It's irrelevant. That money that we're not spending overseas gets spent here, not having been laundered through the government UBI washing machine. Fuck that. I mean, we can build $5 trillion worth of wealth with that over 3 years. Like, give me a fucking break. Like, that's not even hard. I'll take that deal every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I mean, how would you not take that deal? It's dumb. But, this is what passes for analysis on a daily basis because, like, I'm sorry, there's just way too many doom pointers in this friggin' in this end of our industry. Because they haven't just done basic analysis. Like somehow the rules don't, somehow balance sheet management doesn't apply to the government. You're willing to make that analysis when you're predicting that the government is going to go bankrupt, but then when the government is on the verge of bankruptcy, you tell me that it's not possible for the government to reform itself after we had just a massive referendum from the voters to do exactly that for the guy putting in place the team to do exactly that. I thought people were smart. It makes me crazy. I'm sorry.
People were smart.
I thought people were smart, like the people in this industry. I'm like, trying not to name names here. I'm trying not to be mean. Like, I respect these people, but I don't respect this part of their position because I just think it's either lazy or they're just protecting what they're selling. And I'm like, I'm not protecting anything. What do I sell? I sell I'm an asshole. Right. So I get to do this and I'm not hurting my business because my business is, effectively being an asshole. Like someone asked me recently, it's like, what do you do for a living? Because they didn't know. And I'm like, I'm a professional asshole. Literally, that was my answer. And a couple of my patrons were standing there at the time and they went, yeah, that's about right. Like, whatever. Like, you catch me at the end of the day. I had a little bit of sugar before we did this. So I don't know. But my point being is that I'm this animated about this because I can see the opportunity here. And we should all really, really, bear down, put away all of our doom porn and start thinking about how to solve these problems as opposed to just defaulting to these problems are unsolvable. They're not unsolvable. I got news for you. I know people in the transition team and they're all like, oh yeah, this is what we're doing. Like it's there. And we are all hearing stories. I'm not the only one hearing these stories. I'm getting approached by people all the time who are like, should I take the job with the government to fix this stuff? Because they're getting the reach outs are happening. They're everywhere.
Are they reaching out to the right people?
I think so. They're reaching out to people. They're reaching out to people who pay me money. I would consider that a win. They're not reaching out to me, and that's fine. I don't actually want to go work to do that. But my point being is that I I see this happening, and I'm like, and it's right there, right in front of you, and all you got to do is grab it. Could you imagine what this country looks like if we get rid of all of the bullshit that like Mike Rowe talks about all the time, right? Mike Rowe talks about how we're safety first. No, safety third. Go get the job done, right? Like we need the ability for small and medium businesses to overcome these artificial barriers to entry known as like safety regulations and all. I mean, most of this, it sounds terrible when you put it in this all. He doesn't believe in making workers safe. No, actually I do. I just don't think that we should not be productive because we're so worried about not being safe. Like, have you ever watched Clarkson's farm and how he makes fun of all the stupid health and safety regulations that you got to go through just to like plant a seed on his friggin' farm? Are you kidding me? Like, dude, like we planted wheat and soybeans for thousands of friggin' years before the bureaucrat from London told us the way we had to do it and what vest we had to wear and what harness we had to wear. Are you kidding me? Give me a break. Like, get out there and get the goddamn job done. And if you get hurt, well, we'll pay for it. And if you don't want to get hurt, don't do it.
Yeah. You have to be willing to live in the world.
Right. Like in order to build the world.
Exactly.
You want to build something great? You got to go out there and risk something. You don't want to risk something? Then, then I hate this. You're fungus.
You can never.
I don't want to pay for. I'm not paying for fungus anymore. I don't like mushrooms. And when people ask me like, why don't you like mushrooms? It's like, because if I wanted to eat fungus, I would lick the bathroom. Well, guess what, folks? I don't want to lick the bathroom of our economy. There we go. How's that? Yeah. How's that for a metaphor that should have never made the light of day?
That should be right smack dab in the middle of the intro and the teaser, right there.
The funniest part about doing these anymore. So when I do them and I walk away. But then when they come out, I'm always like watch the intros. I'm always a little like doing the Picard thing. I'm like, oh my god, did I say that?
I'll try not to let you down on this one, Tom.
Appreciate it, Danny. I
got a lot of material to work with, so
I think so. So, are we good?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much covers it all. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about that we didn't get to.
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I think we're okay. I mean, just to maybe put a bow on the whole like rant about 2025. It's going to be a very mixed bag. We're going to have a mix of commodity inflation and credit deflation at the same time. So it's going to be a stagflationary environment in that respect. But I also think there's going to be an upward pressure on wages. So we're going to watch the conversion from commodity cost push inflation to demand pull inflation over the course of the next 3 years. But it's going to be commodity cost push inflation first, and then we're going to move to a demand pull environment if Trump and company are allowed to do what they want to do. If they're stymied in that, all bets are off, dude. I don't have a crystal ball for that.
One more question, actually.
Sure.
Drill, baby, drill. Will energy prices come down?
Can energy prices come down lower and keep anybody alive? Keep the drillers alive? I don't think so. I think $72 a barrel is already undervalued. I think oil should be in the minimum 78 to 85 area. I'm looking at the oil chart on a weekly basis. It just looks like one big manipulation every day. Like the correlation between the euro, the weakness of the euro, and the weakness in oil cannot be ignored, because Europe cannot afford higher energy costs. They can't afford rising bond yields, and they can't afford a falling currency, rising energy prices, and falling bond yield and high rising bond yields. Those are the three things that are being held in amber by Christine Lagarde. And eventually she's going to run out of other people's money. Eventually she's going to run out of forbearance. And she's going to run into the buzzsaw that is Scott Bessent at Treasury and Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve. And she's going to have to let something go. And that's why I keep saying it's why they are so desperate in this time frame to push the war in Ukraine and or Syria in such past the point of no return, because they have to be able to blame the collapse that's coming on an external factor. Otherwise, it's just them. And then they stand naked as the tide goes out. And all the capital flows into the United States.
Isn't it already though? I mean, if you track you track the U.S. markets versus the world market. I mean, I've charted this out. It's been in a secular bull market since 2008.
It really has. And it's continuing.
Yeah, it hasn't stopped.
I'm sorry?
No, I said it's essentially a straight line. It hasn't stopped.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you froze on Iran, Danny, so I wasn't sure if you were, we had a problem. But no, I mean it's true. So there you are. So I agree. Like it's been and it's only going to accelerate from here. Like I think we're going to have a weird year, paying off kind of Martin Armstrong's long held prediction of seeing gold, silver, Bitcoin, the dollar, and U.S. stocks all going up at the same time. It's just a pure safe haven, tangible assets play. It's not any more complicated than that.
Right.
I'd like for the world to be more complicated than that from that front, but it's not. It's actually quite a simple trade. And so commodity producers are undervalued. AI stocks are overvalued. There's going to be regression to the mean in both areas. Gold is undervalued if you want to fully collateralize the national balance sheets. So the national central banks. Silver could wind up getting remonetized if we need it to be. I don't think it's going to be though. And Bitcoin again is a collateral asset, especially as is collateral for repo and the money markets. And I think that's what Bitcoin is. I think Bitcoin is uniquely positioned to do that job very, very well. I think the Fed has identified it as such. That's why Tether is effectively now a government subsidiary. And it's why Mark Andreessen is spending half of his time at Mar-a-Lago.
I see. Well, I think this is a good place to close things out here, Tom. Tom, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
As always, you can follow me over my blog at tomluongo.me, which is getting a little long in the tooth. I need to either publish a podcast or publish a blog post. But that or goldgoatsandguns.com. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. And of course, you can follow us on Patreon at Patreon/goldgoatsandguns, where we do the twice weekly market reports, where I rant into a microphone and do technical reads of stock charts, including bespoke reads for patrons. So if you have a stock, if you want me to read a chart for you, I'll be happy to do so, as well as the monthly newsletter where we have a portfolio as well as unique commentary looking forward to where we're going in the future. And that's what we do.
Awesome. We'll have the links to all those down below, guys, so be sure to check them out. If you found value out of this video, remember to give us a like, comment, go Tom, go in the comment section if you agreed with what Tom had to say. If you disagreed with anything, however, let me know as well. I do read the comments, guys, so drop me a comment. Let me know what you thought if you disagreed with anything. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep growing, getting guests like Tom on the show, and it's also an easy way to support to support what I'm doing here. And then finally, support me on Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com, where you can get early access to my videos before YouTube, as well as an ad-free experience. That's capitalcosm.substack.com. Link to all that stuff is down below. With all that said, Tom, thanks again for coming on, and guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you later.